The weather this winter has been brutally cold and windy, so why not stay indoors with some hearty chili? The 5th annual Chili Cook-Off is happening at Sonny's Pizza on February 23rd. Attendees will get to sample over 10 varieties of chili, all from local Georgia Avenue small businesses. RSVP for free or grab a VIP pass, which includes early entry, guaranteed chili tastings, and other perks. Again, that's the 5th annual Chili Cook-Off at Sonny's Pizza. That's in Columbia Heights on Georgia Avenue between Irving and Kenyon, and it's on February 23rd. Today on CityCast DC, as of Sunday, 55 bodies from last week's air catastrophe over the Potomac had been recovered. The investigation is ongoing. But a lot of the conversation is already focusing on just how crowded the space is around National Airport and whether that makes it inherently dangerous. Aviation expert Ian Petchnick, who runs the Avtalk podcast, is here with us to explain DCA's complicated geography and its complicated politics. Today is Monday, February 3rd. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Ian.
Hey, Mike.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, in light of the Potomac plane crash Wednesday night, all of a sudden everyone's an aviation expert.
Sure.
But you actually are an aviation expert.
I've been doing this a while, yes.
So I want to get into a couple of things that have been in the conversation this week. One is what might have gone wrong in terms of air traffic control on the night of the accident. And the other is if there's some kind of particular problem at DCA because of the crowded location. Let's start with air traffic. There's a lot of confusion and misinformation out there about what air traffic controllers do and what might have gone wrong leading up to the crash. Can you just explain to me, to start, how is the system supposed to work, especially at DCA with its kind of complicated airspace?
Sure. So backing up, we have to understand what the airspace looks like around DCA. And DCA is one of the more challenging airports to operate in and around because of the prevalence of air traffic that is not going to the airport, but is very close to the airport. So helicopters to the east, helicopters to the north, helicopters to the south, and then you have air traffic that's coming in and out of DCA that needs to avoid not only other aircraft, but also all of the special restriction areas that are right around DCA, that are over things in DC. Every once in a while, we hear about an aircraft that has breached that perimeter, and if it's a commercial aircraft, it's, the pilots get a talking to. If it's a private aircraft, we often hear about, scrambling of jets and things like that because they're not where they're supposed to be.
And these restricted areas are like a legacy of 9/11 or maybe before that, where you can't fly over the Pentagon or something like that.
Yeah, these are long-standing restricted areas. Think most everything from the river all the way through to the Capitol building and north and south on either side. So it's right off the departure end of the runway or arrival end of the runway, depending on which way you're facing. And then there are a few other restricted areas like over the Naval Observatory. So with all that in mind, the controllers in the tower at DCA are managing not only the traffic that's coming in and out of the airport, they're also managing traffic that's going right around the airport, especially that helicopter traffic.
These air traffic controllers in the tower are the boss of all the traffic, even if it's an Army flight from Fort Belvoir to Andrews or something like that.
Right. So the controller's job is to ensure that the aircraft are maintaining safe separation, are where they're supposed to be, and providing guidance and direction to those aircraft. And that includes everything moving through that airspace, whether it's military or not.
So a lot of us drive over the river every day. Essentially, these planes that are coming into DCA are limited to just being over the river or very close to it because so much of the space is prohibited. Effectively, if you go, it takes me a minute to drive over the Chain Bridge. If you go up 3,000 feet, is it the same narrow width that the planes have to maintain?
Yeah, I mean, the aircraft are coming right down the river. If they're landing at DCA, they're coming either up or down the river. And the aircraft that are transiting that area, the helicopters that are transiting that area on the helicopter routes, those are flying on the east side of the river at a very low altitude. So the maximum altitude on these routes past DCA is 200 feet. So it's low altitude right along the edge of the river.
So a preliminary internal FAA report suggests something was wrong or unusual Wednesday night. There was one air traffic controller doing 2 jobs. This sounds bad to me, but I'm a civilian. I know you haven't read the report, but
right.
Like if this did happen, are we talking like bad, like this is a fireable offense bad, or is this just sort of a suboptimal thing that happens sometimes?
I haven't read the specific report, but in air traffic control generally, there are specific positions within a tower or an air traffic control facility that are done by multiple people at certain times during the day. And then when those periods of high volume traffic are not occurring, those jobs can be done by a single controller because there's not as such a heavy workload. So whether or not there was a single controller doing, a particular job is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing that occurs. And certainly as part of the investigation, the NTSB is going to be looking at air traffic controller staffing. They'll be looking at who was doing what is generally done, what was being done on this day, were they different, and did that factor in at all?
Yeah, so what has been reported, and again, we're super preliminary, is basically that the time when only one person does that job is supposed to start at like 9:30. It started a little bit earlier on this particular night. I'm not sure why. That sounds to me like the kind of thing that doesn't have, it's not supposed to happen, but it's also not super rare.
Again, I don't know, what the timing of these positions is, and if there's a set time or if it's just something that kind of normally happens. So I can't really speak to this exact situation, but it is standard to shift change and to bring in different positions at different times of the day. Without knowing a whole lot more, I really couldn't say.
So they've already taken the step of limiting helicopters in the area between the bridges on the Potomac. I'm not sure what that means. What's your take on that supposed decision?
So this is basically just before we started recording. So I'm still trying to understand what the FAA is in fact doing. But based on some of the reporting from Reuters and CNN, it sounds like the FAA is halting traffic along Route 1, which is the route that comes down the Potomac on the eastern side of the river north of the airport, and Route 4, which is the continuation of that route further south along the east side of the river, south of the airport. From what I understand, they're halting traffic on these routes as part of a review of how they'll structure any helicopter traffic in the region moving forward. So it sounds like they're just saying, okay, we're not going to allow helicopters here for now till we figure out, is this the best way to do things?
And just to be clear, for a pilot, and by this I mean an airline pilot flying a regular flight, what are they supposed to be doing when they come to DCA? I mean, for those of us who've flown in, we know that sometimes we get this incredibly beautiful view of downtown Washington from over the river. Other times it comes up from the south and you don't get much of a view.
Right. The view from the north is the river visual. That's the one that has the beautiful sweeping views of the city and everything like that. Coming up from the south, there's generally 2 approach paths. And in this particular case, there was the use of runway 33, which is the shorter runway that runs up to the northwest. So it's a northwest-southeast directional runway. And they were coming up from the southeast facing northwest to cross the river and then touch down because the runway is right at the end of the river. And so what you're doing is you're flying north up the river over the helicopter traffic, and then you're descending across the river to land. And in this particular case, as they were descending to land, they were on final approach, about to touch down, seconds from touchdown, they collided with the helicopter.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places. Between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
I want to talk about DCA for a second. You mentioned it's got a bunch of eccentricities in the map and in terms of the narrow approaches that pilots are allowed to follow. Given these eccentricities, do they get like special training or some kind of specially tailored thing to work there?
Yes. So DCA has special awareness training is required, among other things. And pilots that fly into DCA will often practice these approaches because they are so exacting. It's something that they're very clear on, making sure that they're following the rules and regulations, not only for the prohibited areas and things like that, but also for, awareness of there are so many helicopters. There is so much other traffic in the region because you also have 2 other major airports. You have multiple military bases that are operating both helicopters and fixed wing aircraft. There's always a lot going on. So they're very conscious of what's happening and making sure that they're operating safely.
So we keep reading everywhere. DCA supposedly has one of the busiest runways in the world or the busiest runway in the country or something like that. What does that mean in practice?
I think what that reference is it's the busiest single runway. Often DCA is operating on one runway for departures and arrivals. And so you have a very busy airport that is extremely popular because of its proximity to the capital. And you have aircraft that are flying in and flying out, and it's a high cadence, it's a compacted area, and so it keeps things very busy.
So there have been, over my lifetime, there have been periodically calls for we got to get rid of DCA or move most of its operations. After 9/11, there was some talk like that. It wasn't about danger of plane crashes. It was about danger of terrorists, intentional accidents. It's obviously, there's a lot of people who live near there, don't much like the noise. My parents were one of them. We've recently had a thing with Congress pushing to expand the number of long distance flights from DCA. What I've never gotten, because there's been a lot of criticism, is the density of the space around there. Is it annoying for airlines? Is it the kind of thing that could cause delays more often? Or does it actually make us less safe in terms of accidents? I have flown into Kathmandu, and there the approach is narrow, but if you go off the approach, you hit a mountain. That's not obviously what's going to happen here. On the other hand, there's a lot of air traffic in the area. So is DCA inherently more dangerous from a accident point of view or just from delay and other points of view?
I think the design of the airspace is what creates the issues with DCA and the design of the airfield. I mean, you have a very busy airport on very limited space. There's just not a lot of space at the airfield. So you do have issues with delays and things like that because of the volume of aircraft that are using that small space. I don't think that makes it inherently more dangerous because of the design of the airspace. The design of the airspace is designed to keep everyone safely separated. That unfortunately didn't happen here.
I mean, the most sort of catastrophic accident there, I was a little kid when it happened, but I remember it, very well watching on TV. It was 1982, but that didn't involve another plane. That involved a bridge that the plane hit. On the other hand, we've learned this week, this is not the first time there's been a serious air traffic control incident. There was one last year. What happened there?
So I think you're referring to the runway incursion where there was an aircraft landing and another aircraft nearly entered the runway. These kind of incidents happen. The good thing about aviation generally is that when something happens that's not supposed to, there's an investigation to determine what happened, why it happened, and how we can prevent it from ever happening again. And we're just at the beginning stages of determining what happened here. And then from there, how can we prevent it from ever happening again?
Is there a sense that these sorts of close calls or incursions or things that shouldn't happen again happen more frequently at DCA than they might at an airport that's in the middle of nowhere?
I don't have statistics on that, unfortunately. Though I can say that the more traffic you have, the more potential there is for incidents. I mean, as opposed to Sioux City, Iowa airport, where you don't necessarily have that level of traffic, so you're not going to have the rate that DCA does. But you also have the highest professionals, because folks that work here know the airspace very well and know what they're doing. So I think that's the flip side of that coin.
So we also have a sort of politics challenge with the airports in the DC area. They're owned by this Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, which his membership is made up of representatives from the local governments, the feds, all kinds of things. DCA obviously is like the home airport of Congress. Congress has had sort of itchy fingers over the years wanting to add more flights to, where powerful Congress people happen to live. These efforts usually lead to some pushback, but, sometimes the claims about this is going to be unsafe are actually from people who don't like the noise or from airlines who are based at another airport and don't want the competition, which leads to a situation where some people tend to roll their eyes at arguments about safety. Is there anything to the argument that adding more flights, particularly long distance flights, has anything to do with the safety challenges of this airport or any airport?
The capacity of an airport to operate is based on, how many flights can we safely operate per hour or per day. And I don't think that the distance of those flights really has much bearing on the safety of it. But the number of flights certainly does. And so that's why when looking at these airports that have a small physical footprint like DCA or LaGuardia, where you have a lot of aircraft, especially flying at certain times of the day. People want to come in the morning for meetings and they want to leave, at the end of the day after their meetings. So you have these areas of peak volume. And so you have to design the airport and design the airspace and use your slot restrictions in a way that keeps everything safely separated.
As a local, I love DCA because it's so close. You can, jump on the
Absolutely.
metro and after work and be there in 20 minutes. It's not a huge schlep out to the distant suburbs as you would have in most cities. Yeah, I know I've flown into San Diego where the airport's in town. Are there many airports like DCA that are close to the middle of things? And are those airports all problematic in some way?
There are many where the major airport is basically right downtown or so easily accessible, in the US at least. I don't think that necessarily makes them more difficult or less safe in any way. It's just a consequence of history where we started to look outside the city center when we started to build major airports.
Right. So DCA is obviously has been there almost 100 years. And in those days, the city center was a lot smaller. I guess there's people who argue it's time to move beyond these close to the city airports. Do you think there's anything to that argument?
I think that people have been trying to close airports and move airports for many years. In some cities, they've been successful. In some cities, they haven't. But there's a lot of inertia to keep things moving as they are. And I wouldn't foresee that in the near future, at least.
In general, what do you think could be done to fix the sort of problems wrought by congestion? Is it about decreasing the congestion or are there systems that need to be put in place?
I think the FAA's review of the helicopter routes is a good first step to understand, where are they operating and how should they be operating? How should those air corridors be designed around this airport? And then from there, you look at what are the approach procedures, what are the departure procedures, and can we do anything to make these safer?
Ian, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not rate and review the show? It helps people find us. And subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey DC, for more updates. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.